Ceann Comhairle. I won't be using all of the time, just a couple of minutes, please. Budget 2020 is a series of missed opportunities that will do next to nothing to address some of the major issues facing communities and households across this state. There will be hundreds of thousands of families today who will either be worse off or no better off following this budget. By failing to make the kind of ambitious leap that was required in respect to carers, the Minister has essentially done nothing to address the crisis, despite his commitment to deliver an additional 1 million home help hours. And I know that the family carers of Ireland, they looked for just a reasonable 3.2 million budget, but have been left really no better off as a result of Budget 2020. It did absolutely nothing to support them in any way. And by failing in this regard, we're failing so many carers across this state who do a fantastic job. And the point that has been missed here is that these carers save this state an estimated 10 billion every year. And the fact that we can't give them basic and adequate supports is really shameful and unjustifiable. We know that it would have taken approximately 2.5 million additional hours just to clear the backlog in terms of waiting times, and that's really what should have been done here, because what we're going to see now is beds continuing to be taken up in hospitals where patients can't be released, and we'll see carers continuing to really suffer trying to take care of their family members. I just think that it was a disgrace to leave the carers out in terms of adequate supports. And also, there is an issue in terms of carers now being afforded the opportunity to work or study a few extra hours, and that's all that was, is a few extra hours. It is disappointing to see that the income disregard was not increased for carers in receipt of carers allowance, carers benefit and carers support grant. I would ask for that to be looked at, because there seems to be a major problem in terms of this issue, and it has been brought to my attention today. It is almost incomprehensible that the Minister made no mention whatsoever of Fair Deal. The fact that this Fair Deal scheme was promised to farmers and businesses who have been continuously suffering and under great financial pressure, and also, the fact that it was approved at cabinet level, it was very, very misleading and unfair to give us the impression that there was going to be something here in the budget for small family farms and businesses. I really think it was unfair and unnecessary. I feel that that should be looked at also. There were promised reforms, as I say, and now that's reneged upon, or appears to be. It does demonstrate a worrying political blindness to the scale of the problems facing the scheme. I mean, there's serious discrimination against family farms and small businesses, so we're allowing this discrimination and injustice to continue if we don't address this issue. With respect to schools, as a former teacher and school principal, I can understand the frustration from principals across this state today, and indeed teachers across this state. While I acknowledge the increase in SNAs, I feel that it didn't go half far enough. The three main priorities outlined by organisations such as the INTO, the CPMSA, they were not met at all, and there was no attempt to try and resolve the main issues in education that were highlighted. Those issues being, release days for burnt-out principals, and I know I've met many of them across Laois and Offaly, and all they've asked for is one release day a week in order to cope with the ever-increasing bureaucracy and admin work that they're expected to do within the schools. So what we're going to see happening now is very few people wanting to take up a principal's post, because there's no admin there, there's no admin or release days there for them, and indeed no encouragement or no respect. In relation to there was a lack of commitment to restore the capitation grant, which has been cut. in the recession times, there was no attempt to restore that grant, or there was no attempt to address the pupil-teacher ratios. So we're seeing supersized classrooms of 30+ pupils. Many of those pupils would have varying levels of need and various abilities. And what we see now is many hard-working teachers across this state really trying to teach their classes, but what's happening is crowd control. They're not being given a fair chance. And again, what is that saying to our young graduates or anyone that might be thinking of entering the teaching profession? It's certainly not encouraging, and it's certainly not giving a good impression. It's certainly showing the disrespect and the lack of support and lack of acknowledgement of the profession and lack of value attached to the whole profession. So that was very, very disappointing to see that absolutely nothing happened in that regard. And what it does mean now is the fact that the capitation grant hasn't been restored. We'll see hard-pressed parents continuing to pay voluntary contributions to schools just to keep the lighting and heating on in the schools. I mean, that's not a parent's job, it's the state's job and this government's job to make sure that adequate funding is given to our schools, but they haven't done that. So now we'll see organisations like St Vincent de Paul continuing to see about 40% of their requests for practical assistance from hard-pressed parents in relation to school costs every year where parents have to go look for that funding. I do want to acknowledge that there was £1 million funding provided to farmers affected by special areas of conservation and special protection areas. I had written a number of letters to Minister Madigan on this issue and had submitted a number of parliamentary questions. I do welcome it as a positive step. We do need the restoration of the compensation and indeed the opening of the National Parks and Wildlife Plan that was there, so we do need to see that happening. I do express serious concern over the carbon taxes increases, and again it's another nail in the coffin for rural Ireland and rural communities, because these carbon tax increases will directly affect rural households and communities where there isn't adequate public transport. And I know Irish Rural Link have raised that very point today, and they have been for some time now, about the lack of adequate public transport. But it's just like the government have paid no heed to the consequences of their actions and what their actions will have on rural communities who have not got, as I say, adequate public transport or infrastructure in place. In terms of the package for the Midlands and the proposal for a so-called Just Transition Commissioner, that is something that I would like to see more detail on. I have continuously called on the Minister to ensure that there's a practical focus given to this issue, because there is huge concern, and I would be very concerned by the fact that the money that has been ring-fenced is not enough. It's totally inadequate. We need a lot more funding directed towards the Midlands. I just feel that throwing a sweet or two on this is not good enough, and certainly people in my own community in Offaly are still very concerned, and they haven't fallen for this by any means. You know, the tokenistic gesture given through the budget. We need to see a lot more. We have seen the potentially devastating impact that a failure to address the issue in the Midlands can have in terms of Board and Money. We've seen, for example, the delays, ongoing delays in trying to have a plan together, you know, to try and make sure that the Midlands is looked after, and I'm not convinced that the Midlands is looked after by any shape or means in Budget 2020. As the detail of the budget works itself out over the course of the next few days, I believe it will become clearer that this budget is sorely lacking in determination and also in focus to place policy fairness at its core. And it was just brought to my attention there earlier today also that Dáil Éireann, who have been in receipt of direct funding for many years, many decades indeed, have now had that direct funding taken away. It's going to come through the Arts Council. I think that that's a shameful attack on our heritage and culture, and I would urge the Minister to review the decision that she has made. We know that the annual FLA held here, has thousands of participants, and that it's worth about 50 million to the town which holds the FLA. It's a huge success. Indeed, it boosts our tourism, and it it also helps the local economies in many towns. And I do feel that this decision is a shameful one and an insult to Ceoltas Dáil Éireann, who have done fantastic work over many, many years. I would hope that that decision will be reviewed. In terms of housing then, I just feel that, there's no sense of urgency to address the housing emergency. I know in my own county I'm seeing couples struggling to pay rents of over €1,000 in our main towns. I have called on the Minister many times to introduce rent pressure zones in the towns of Tullamore and Edenderry, and it's disappointing to see that the criteria hasn't been broadened in order to be designated as a rent pressure zone. I feel myself, and I have said it to the Minister, that disposable income of a particular region should be taken into account when deciding on rent pressure zones. I know that people are really struggling. There's many young couples will never own their own home or be able to be in a position to have a mortgage due to the lack of affordable housing. And also, just to mention, like the homelessness crisis, that's not going to be resolved by any shape or means by Budget 2020. And I'm disappointed to see that there wasn't more of a concerted effort made in regard to housing. I feel overall that it's a deep regret, given the scale of the challenges that most of our vulnerable people are facing, that there's been such a lack of support and indeed a lack of response in Budget 2020. And there might be a few glimmers of hope in certain areas of the budget, but overall, I must say, it is disappointing. And I've had feedback from all the different sectors: agriculture, education, health, and people are very, very disappointed. So I'm reading the reports as they come in and indeed answering the calls to many concerned people, and I feel it's disappointing. Garamagat.